Give me a thumbs up or excellent, excellent. Thank you, Mohinder. Good evening, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Saturday Night Fever. And it's the title is pretty cool. I know for most of you young kids out there, I should say that this is a movie that you guys need to watch. I'm sure you'll get a kick out of it. Saturday Night Fever is a very famous movie from the 70s. So that was probably way before many of you were even born, or even probably not even a thought at this point. So I'm sorry, I'm kidding. So take a look at Saturday Night Fever. It's a fun movie, and I thought it'd be fun to have a show named after the movie. So that's why it's called Saturday Night Fever, and it's on Saturday evening. So good enough, close enough. All right. So I just wanted to. So today's episode is actually something that I am really excited. I see a question here from Rahil, I think, wanting to know whether this is only a cybersecurity related talk. Rahil, I hate to disappoint you, but it's not only cybersecurity related. There will certainly be some discussion around cybersecurity, but we are going to be talking about a whole bunch of items. Rajeev is a very good friend of mine. We've known each other for years now. I've even lost count. We met first when I was at the erstwhile Computer Associates, now they're Broadcom. And he was heading a business unit, and I was heading a business unit. And that's how we met for the first time. And it's been a lot of fun since then. We've stayed off and on in touch. So Rajeev is somebody that who I respect a lot. He's a pretty amazing guy, and you'll see, very knowledgeable, terrific thinker. So one of the reasons I wanted him on the show was to actually share some of his experiences and some of his tips for all of us, as a matter of fact, right? So some of the topics that we're going to be dealing with today, yeah, just give KB, just give it a minute. We'll get Rajeev on just in a minute. So just hold on. We're going to be talking CyberSec because that's his business. I mean, he's actually started a company called Castellum. We'll get to hear from him. And then we will also switch gears into stuff in the world of leadership and startups specifically, right? And then from there, we'll move into other topics of interest as well. So while to cut a long story short, let's have fun. Let's get Rajeev on the show. And Rajeev, if you can turn on your camera and your video, your camera and your mic, so the audience and all of us can see you. Rajeev, you there? Okay, there we go. All right, there you are, man. Say something so the audience can figure out whether they can hear you.
Hey, Bharat, you're not. Can you hear me? I can't hear you. You're not audible.
You can't hear me. Uh-oh. How about this? Any better? Can you hear me now?
I can hear you now. Yep.
Okay. Well, all right. Good. Yeah, it's very difficult to not hear me, Rajeev. Come on, you should know that now. These skills, right?
Yeah.
I mean, to not hear me is a privilege, I think. All right. So great. Welcome to the show. As you can see, we've got a bunch of people already online with us. So great to actually see you live and face to face. I know we've had a couple of conversations here and there, and you've been doing some pretty cool stuff, especially with Castellum and stuff. But before I get you into Castellum and what you do there, Rajeev, you've been in the technology space and in the technology world for quite some time now, and you're one of those respected voices and faces in the industry, as we all know it. So what's the deal with moving back and forth between corporates, and now you've got the startup avatar that you've got going on? So help us understand what this is about, and tell us a little bit about your journey and where you've been.
Sure. Right. So first of all, thanks for inviting me on the show, and it's always a pleasure to talk to you. And being on a show with a friend,
exactly, you can't beat that, right?
Twice the joy. Twice the joy. You can't beat that, yeah. So
absolutely.
So So I've been, it has been an incredible and exciting journey of life. And as you already know, but for the rest of the audience, I started out most of my early career was in US, and uh, worked for companies like Sun Microsystems, and then came back to India almost 15 years ago. Right? And quite a bit of an early part of coming back to India was with MNCs, basically establishing business units and technology units for different MNCs. I mean, we were together in CA and Computer Associates.
Right.
And truth to be told, I mean, my my time with the deep technology started with Sun Microsystems. Sun was I joined. I was part of the Sun Microsystems at the peak of the valley. Those times, the excitement and the energies was palpating, and so I was in Sun from '96 all the way to 2003. So that was the time when Sun was supposed to be the company which actually made internet happen. So
Right, that's true. And guess what? After that, Oracle
after
picked them
that,
up, and then
so
it just went straight downhill. I think.
correct. So we, so I, my time, a lot of my early career was in data center networking, those kind of stuff, right? And but then when I joined CA, because I landed into cybersecurity business unit of CA, that's when my passion about the cybersecurity. I mean, it took the root in CA, and then after leaving CA, I did couple of ventures in minor partnership with people, and so already established companies, but I picked up some equity and helped build some new businesses there. And all of this was leading to a point where I would start my own venture. And so I started Castellum Labs in 2018, and it has been an exciting journey. And to be very candid, despite the start in 2018 and formation of a lot of ideas, as of today, we are doing two separate ventures. One is called Castellum, another one is called Watch Out, and both of them, they are in cybersecurity space. So one is services
and Watch Out.
Watch Out, yeah. So Castellum is a services venture. Watch Out is a product venture, and but we started in 2018
in the CyberSec space, essentially.
I'm sorry.
Both in the cybersecurity space, right?
Both of them in the cybersecurity space.
Okay.
Watch Out is a SaaS platform business, as a product business, and Castellum is more of an MSSP play. So even Castellum technology plays a significant role, because we don't really have people only business. Engineering plays a central role in delivering high quality services to the market in Castellum. But then Watch Out is a pure play SaaS business. So it has been an exciting journey. I mean, I've seen the globe, and I've seen all aspects of growing economy, crashing economies, and I've seen.
But you're a freaking hard guy to get a hold of. So obviously, your startups are both your businesses obviously are off and running, and you're running obviously. Probably 700 miles an hour. So how does that feel?
It's interesting, and it's challenging, of course, but it's interesting in the sense that see, when you do a startup, after coming from a leadership position, in corporate, from the corporate world, I mean, the startup feels very, very different, So I didn't just start my companies when I was 24 or 23. I mean, I started my company when I was well above 40, right? So it's a very different journey, and I feel both. The good thing is that I feel both sides of it. There are distinct advantages about starting your startup journey when you are well above 40, 45, and then obviously you also have certain amount of constraints when you start when you cross 40. So it has been exciting. It has been often frustrating, but then often exceptionally rewarding. I mean, things you get to see. I mean, a lot of things which you forget if you have been in the corporate world for a long time. I was in corporate world for more than 25 years before I started my journey as an entrepreneur. So a lot of things when you completely forget, particularly if you've been in the leadership role in the corporate, suddenly you get onto the ground and you start connecting with people. You start dealing with the problems you didn't know that they existed. So,
exactly. So in fact, that brings me to a really interesting thing. I mean, I think you and I chatted about this a little bit. In the corporate world, you've got managers and managers and layers and all kinds of stuff, and you've got resources that you could, it's on tap, right? I mean,
correct.
yeah, I know. I remember you and I bitching about, okay, this was not working or that was not working or budgets were not coming in or et cetera, or somebody is not doing their job. But in a startup, it must be everything is you.
Absolutely.
Right?
Absolutely.
You can't point the finger here or there or anything of the sort.
Correct.
So that must be a pretty humbling experience, I would think.
It's a humbling experience, and I recommend everybody. I mean, I honestly, despite being it's an experience which changes your perspective about both about profession and about industry, and also about life. I mean, things which you take for granted, the things which are around you, you think that they happen, by themselves. When you start a journey like this, I got to share something, which is very interesting. Is that
sure?
Here, one of the biggest is somebody asked me just a few weeks ago is that what is the most difficult part of being in the startup, or doing a startup, and what is the most challenging? Fine, I mean you need to struggle with the resources and you got to make things happen in the market. You got to build a brand and all that is fine. But what is the most difficult part of the startup, particularly if you're starting after spending 20 years in the industry? So I looked at him and I said, you know what, when you've been in the industry for 25 years and when you have been in the top leadership of the big companies, when people they look at you with certain amount of reverence, and there are people who don't get to meet you for your entire duration in the company because there is a hierarchy no matter whether you want it or not. And when you come to the startup, a guy who has straight come out of the college, he basically is asking the questions about your credibility. And he would ask you, is that why should I join you? So that is handling those aspects, because it's not about whether I'm going to be in a position to, can I provide a vision and can I present a vision, which is a compelling vision. That is simple. That's a given. That is something we can do. All of us we can do who have been in the industry for a long time. But dealing with that emotionally, dealing with that fact that I have to convince an absolute set of freshers to join a new journey, that's a tough and complex thing to do.
Yeah. No, I absolutely. What is interesting here when as you're saying this about your this conversation that you had, that it's been just about a year since I retired from the corporate world, and I mean a little more than a year now, and I just started coaching, right? Executive coaching. Now, what's wound up happening there is very similar story to yours, right? I mean, why should people come to me? So it's almost like every place I go to now, Bharat Kalyanram, the CXO, the VP, the this, the that, it's only on paper. It's meaningless.
Correct.
Because
Absolutely.
The client who's coming to me, or I'm going to the client or the prospective client, it's literally I have to start from ground zero and build my credibility up every step of the way.
Correct.
But also interesting, I think, Rajeev, in this whole thing, right, is that leadership styles in corporates and startups, I think, must be two very different things.
It is.
Or do you essentially say the same thing?
Yeah, the leadership style, I think, I believe the startup, by definition, or because of this, because of the ecosystem, startups, they force a particular type of leadership style. I mean, they actually demand a specific leadership style, and that leadership style, I call it every startup, if it is not, if it doesn't operate like an organism, if it does not operate like as a living body where everybody is connected with everybody,
Mm,
the
mm.
every startup would sooner or later die if they don't become accustomed to operating as a living body. Right? And I believe this is something which is going to change
Right.
in the corporates as well, because a lot of corporates, they've continued with the relatively older concepts of leadership. Right? And
Mm.
what I see happening is that despite the challenges on the leadership when you are working in a startup or when you are scaling a
Yeah.
startup, despite the challenges, the demands of the leaderships are different. And I believe that there will be a reverse migration of the leadership concepts, which will emerge in the
Mm.
startup ecosystem back into the corporate.
Wow, that's really. I mean, I think that is definitely a very insightful comment here, Rajeev, because you and I were talking just before we got on the show, right? About is the era of managers, are managers going through an extinction right now?
Mm.
The traditional, what we all associate as managers, are they going through? Are they an endangered species? In fact, today on my LinkedIn, I made a post because I was watching this clip from Ayo Shraddha,
Mm.
and it was hilarious, of course,
Mm.
but it raised some very important questions, right?
Mm.
And to me, the questions I get always are, if a manager is not, see, ultimately we're all in business or in doing something
Mm.
because we want to add value. And what do
Mm.
I mean by value?
Mm.
Either we want to bring satisfaction to somebody's life, or we want to bring satisfaction to a customer, or we want to make money for a company, or we want to manage costs for a company, or we want to create a product. I mean, so the creative process is what I call is a
Mm.
value add.
Mm.
Each one creates in a different way. Right?
Mm.
Now, what winds up happening is that unfortunately, managers, within quotes, managers, and this is not by any means a generalization,
Mm.
but if managers are perceived as just layers between the person who actually thinks about something and the person actually doing,
Mm.
nobody is able to figure out what their ad is, right?
Mm.
What is
Mm.
the addition that they're making between these layers?
Mm. Mm.
Then the
Correct.
question comes up about survival or extinction.
Correct. 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 So,
And we all know, yeah, sorry, go on.
yeah. See, if you look at the concept of the managers or the concept of the management, with the lens of, let's say, 70s or 80s or 90s, even 90s,
Hmm. Hmm.
majority of that management, that if we cut all the noise around all the fancy words, you would basically find that
Right,
majority of that was related to how how the construct of an objective, organizational objective, is percolated down in the organization. That was the job of the manager, and
right. Hmm.
the reason was that the information dissemination and was not automated. Some 25, even 20
Right.
years ago, the information
20 years
dissemination
ago.
was
Yeah,
not
yeah.
fully automated. So today, if you look at how technology world has evolved, and you look at how workplaces they have evolved, information dissemination, it does not need to be done by humans. I mean, there is nothing called information dissemination to be done by managers. Right?
Sure.
Information control or information tracking is also not needed by managers.
Hmm.
So today, if there was if there was ever good time to understand what does it mean to be a leader in the trenches, the time is now. Right?
Right, right.
Today, the concept, and we talked about, you remember, we talked about those type of things in 10 years ago, 20 years ago, even 15 years ago, that you would
Absolutely.
get up in the trenches, you need to understand, you
Yeah.
got to be with the troops and all. Right? Today, that's not something you do as a value add. Today, that is leadership. Right? Today,
Exactly.
that has morphed into the first and the foremost traits of a
As a
leader.
leader.
Correct.
Yep.
So that is one see as the traditional role of the manager, where most of the job, I wouldn't say all of it, but the most of the
Right.
job was actually about disseminating work and then aggregating the statuses and rolling up that status back to the whatever that hierarchy was. Right.
This listening to you, it triggered a thought in me, right? I mean, there's been a distinct evolution of for all of us, right? I mean, when you look at the different phases, the earliest I can think of historically is really, the Industrial Revolution, as we talked about, right? Where scale started to become a big deal. Ford, of course, was the one who, built the whole concept of automation and assembly line, and therefore, as scale increased, one person could not manage a workforce of 10 or 20. Now, suddenly you're dealing with hundreds of people. So you had the Industrial Revolution, sort of, I'm oversimplifying it, but just bear with me here. Now, the Industrial Revolution, we morphed into the so-called information revolution, right? Which is where the whole technologies started to emerge, and information technology started to become a big deal. And there again, a distinct difference started to open up between services and products. Right? What we found was services started to become again about that scale. So we took the industrial model and plugged it into the services industry, and therefore the similar kind of alignment was possible. And then we morphed into the digital and social digital age, I would say, which is probably where we are right now. But we are now in a transition, I believe, into what is an experiential economy. We're we're actually moving out of the digital economy. Digital just now becomes an enabler. It's just like it has always been an enabler, but essentially we are parlaying experiences to people. After all, what are you and I doing here right now on this live stream?
Correct.
We are selling an experience. We're talking about an experience. Right? I mean, that's why people are here on the show.
Correct.
So, if experiences are what we're going to consume, then what does the manager, within quotes, does the manager even exist? Should organizations now just think in terms of being, amorphous masses of, like amoeba, literally? Like, you can go in there and you can just start, incorporating different pieces or creating new pieces, becoming self-morphing sort of organizations. Is that where we are headed?
I think the experience is, the manager's job or the leader's job is shifting into facilitating an experience, and an experience is not something you could actually hand off, or you could, give. It's not a downward flow experience. You cannot create an experience for any organization just by structuring things in a downward flow. And so I think the biggest change is that. The biggest change is that managers, they need to, the concept of the management has to re-evolve around how do you experience. You can create a wonderful experience only through participation. And I don't want to give you a sort of weird analogy about that. Is that everybody wants to create wonderful experience in the family, and try creating that experience by a downward trickle, and it's going to just fall apart. It's just going to
collapses.
Correct.
It just collapses.
Correct. So how do you create a wonderful experience? Even if you're head of a family, you create an experience by participating in that experience. Right. That is how you improve the quality of experience for everybody. Right. That concept doesn't exist in management theories and management.
I think you're right on. So, what do you guys do at Castellum with this kind of thing? I mean, you've got people. Obviously, you've got very solid technical people. I'm sure you've got terrific marketing guys, and how do you make that work together in the world as a startup? And you're no longer you're the big cheese. You're the founder and CEO, but I'm sure you're also the head bottle washer over there. You must be getting down there into pretty.
So some of the things are. Let's take an example. Some of the things we got away, and we realized that very soon. I mean, for me, it was a quick realization. It was a difficult realization because I wasn't ready for it. So some things we got away with any kind of status update. There is no status update in the entire company. Nobody does any status update. There's a constant stream of communication, and for that we use certain tools. There's a constant stream of communication, but there is nothing called a weekly status or a daily status, right? Because this is not this is not something which is needed. If you are part of the experience, think about it this way: if you're part of that experience you're creating of the day, right, you wouldn't need a status, right? And if you're asking your guys to provide a status update at the end of the day, that means your involvement is not experiential. Your involvement is something else. Your involvement with the organization is actually structural, right? So that's one thing we do.
It's fantastic. What you just used, the distinction between experiential leadership versus structural leadership,
Got it.
I think is a very, very apt way of putting it. It resonates with me. It definitely resonates with me.
Right.
That's pretty cool. So
Right.
tell us, I'm sorry, I'm going to switch gears a little bit here, Rajeev, just to keep the conversation going. Tell me a little bit about Castellum. I know a little bit about it, certainly, but it'd be great for some of our guys over here to hear about Castellum. And before that, before that, there's one question or one point I want to address. I usually hold off on questions until the end of the show, but Sriram has got a couple of points here. He asked, you don't think the resume matters or testimonials, resume and past clients. So I want to address that right off the bat. And I want to say that certainly, but the way Sriram, it's a very good question you asked. But one thing I want to be very clear about: the resume is what gets your foot in the door. It doesn't assure you of where you're going to go from there. Similarly, testimonials. You're only as good as your last job. You're only as good as your last client experience. Every experience is a string of things that you're going to have to stitch together. Okay. So, one of my favorite sayings is, yesterday's news wraps today's fish. So what that essentially means, if you go to a fish market, essentially, what do you wrap the fish in? It's always yesterday's newspaper. So what I did yesterday and what I do tomorrow are two very different things. It doesn't matter where I come from. So I'm just giving you this as a little bit of advice, just to keep that in mind, that yes, your resume and your testimonials and your past clients are extremely important, but they are only going to get your foot in the door. It does not entitle you or any of us, even me, myself included, Rajeev included, does not entitle us for anything. Rajeev, you want to add to that? Or
Absolutely. So the impact, I look at this thing is that the impact you make is the only credential you have got in life. There is no other credential, a line on the profile, on the resume, a certification, or even a recommendation. It doesn't. At the end of the day, it doesn't really it doesn't give you any credibility. The only credibility you get is through the impact you make. And to be very candid, if you look at everybody's profile in the industry, you get into a company on an average stay time of somebody in a company is almost 2 years. If you look, almost 90% of the 90% of the workforce is of that way. That average time in a company is 2 years. You don't have the time to actually build lines on your resume. You have got the time only to create an impact, right? If you create an impact, and that impact is going to get converted into credibility, and that's going to go the long way. If you keep on adding lines to your profile, sooner or later your profile actually becomes irrelevant.
That's good. Sriram, I hope we address that question, because I don't want anybody here to have any misconceptions that we're saying that what work you did yesterday is meaningless. That doesn't mean that. It just means that you're only as good as that last job that you did. So if you're building a startup, if you're building a new business, if you're looking for new clients, the past client experience is only going to get you in the door. After that, you still got to make the impact. So it's not like, there's no guarantee that you're in and I'm done. Right? So cool. Switching back to Castellum. So tell us a little bit about Castellum, what you guys are doing there.
So Castellum, we started with a vision of, we looked at how cybersecurity is being done, right? And, so one fundamental problem, you would have heard about that, the shortage of the talent in cybersecurity. NASCOM basically declared there's a shortage of 5 million people in cybersecurity. And so we looked at the industry. We found that a lot of what is being done today is actually very, very transactional in nature. There's a project, and a lot of providers there, they get into a project, complete the project in 2 months, hand over some report back to the organization.
And then you're done.
And then off you go. And then what happens to the security of that company, whether the company was really got secured. So it has happened that a project which has costed a company of 50 lakh rupees or something of that nature, just 1 month after the project completion, there was a breach in that company. Right? So we didn't find that there's enough continuity, there's enough ownership in terms of how cybersecurity is actually getting managed, particularly from the services point of view.
So is this on the, you're referring to on the SOC side, like the
On
typical
we are referring to the Castellum site here, the Castellum site.
Okay, got it.
So,
Got it. Okay.
the vision was to create a company which is an MSSP, a managed security service provider, right? But then the managed security services getting offered to the industry using technology, using combination of technology and people, not the combination of the tool and the people. So we have been successful. We created multiple platforms. We've created roughly about 4 different platforms. These platforms, they play a significant role in orchestrating services for the customer. These platforms also give us an ability to provide a strong sense of continuity with the customer, because these platforms, they hold a lot of data. These platforms, they correlate, if a particular cybersecurity activity was done with let's say 3 times a year, right? Because it holds that data, it connects that data across 3 exercises. Customer knows where he's going, whether he is getting more secure or his security is moving down. He gets to know. So basically, Castellum's vision was to offer engineering dimension to manage security of the customer. That's what we do. Is that we are very strong with our platforms. The core strength of the organization is engineering, and then engineering those platforms, they are supported and supplemented by a very strong central team based out of Hyderabad. And we are in a position to give customers continuity. We are in a position to give customers deep insight into things which are not visible to them earlier. We are in a position to do that because we have not looked at the industry from a transaction point of view. We are not interested. Generally, we don't get engaged with the customers just for one-time engagement.
So you're saying that you offer kind of like, instead of providing specific point solutions to a customer saying that, okay, I'm going to manage your access management or I'm going to manage your networks, you're essentially saying that, hey, you know what? I'm going to secure your environment. So is that what you're doing? That you're saying that, hey, I'm looking at every dimension out here, my product, my capabilities, along with the services, is going to be able to provide you the level of security and the operations associated with it.
Yeah, I mean, so let's take an example. Let's take an example of application security or web security. Right?
Sure.
What we saw happening in the industry is that generally engagement would translate into some 30-day or maybe 60-day or 90-day type of project. And the provider would almost always give a report of vulnerabilities to the customer. And then those vulnerabilities, they will be tried and fixed by the customer, and maybe a regression would happen. But at the end of the day, customer did not have a view that over a period of, let's say, 1 year, what happened, whether his web surface became more secure or it became less secure. Right? So we provided an alternative engagement model where we said that we would be in a position to give you a stated progression, sense of progression, that how your security is moving, whatever area we touch in, whether it is application security or SOC monitoring or vulnerability management. In every area, we said that we're going to be in a position to give you a sense of progression. We're going to be in a position to tell you what was your attack surface 6 months ago. And because we did these 2 things in the last 6 months, how that attack surface has reduced over a period of last 6 months. So that's the major differentiator we actually bring to the industry.
Got it. Now, thanks for that. And, because one of the things that most people don't realize about CyberSec, and, having been now, my last gig with Oracle running security products business, I can tell you, security is one of those things that is probably the least understood and the most taken for granted.
Yes.
Because it's kind of, you assume, right? I mean, you log into your laptop and, you've got some SSO and you've got something, and you're like, as far as I, the user, am concerned, hey, I don't give a shit. I don't give a, whatever stuff as to what happens on the background, right? Because the real thing is over there. Now, the question I've got is, with all of the stuff that we have happening in the world today, right, with breaches happening left, right, and center, data being stolen. I mean, a couple of days ago, I even saw a crazy story in the Deccan Herald about physical devices, rack servers, and stuff being stolen from the UID AI office. I mean, that's physical, right?
Correct.
And then you're thinking, okay, if your physical security is so pathetic,
Correct.
I hate to think what your software security is like.
Correct.
So between cyber crime and now even cyber warfare, I would say, we've really got some serious issues here.
Oh, we got
And how
absolutely.
can we as people, as citizens, as guys who are users primarily of this technology, right? What's the kind of stuff we need to be doing? Or how should we be thinking about this stuff?
I mean, we have to relate to. I mean, if you look at if you look at let's talk about actually the consumer side of it or the user side of it first.
Right.
So,
Mm-hmm.
when you go out of the house, and even today, even if you live in a secure society, let's say if you live in a gated society, even then you would actually check your lock. You would twist your handle twice, the door handle twice, to make sure that door is
Make
actually
sure it's
closed.
secure. Right.
Correct. But the same behavior is not there when you're actually logging out of the e-com site.
Yeah.
Almost 100% of the people, when they buy something on the e-com site, they would not care about, even if they're buying it on. They
They
wouldn't.
actually haven't ended the session.
Correct. So there's a major shift needed, in the mindset of the users that in the past, the worst which could happen with the security, with the lack of the security, or the worst which could happen is that you could lose data, right? You could lose some information. That's what worst could happen. Now things they've gotten to a point where you could definitely lose money, right? And actually, not only that, a lot of people they're losing money. I mean, in India, if you look at, you're going to be surprised if I tell you the statistics. In India, the maximum number of financial losses, right, fraudulent through the defrauding of the customer, maximum number of those they actually happen in the tier 3 cities, not in the tier 1 and tier 2 cities. Right?
Wow.
Right. So
wow.
So this is one thing, is that why do you when we got to think about is that why do you sort of twist your doorknob 3 times before you go out
to the house, but you don't
because
bother
it comes it's downloaded into your conscious conscience from what you learned, what you saw, right, in the last 40 years or 50 years or whatever lifespan you have had.
Sure.
But that behavioral shift into the world of the cyber has not happened yet, right? So that's one thing which has to for sure change, right?
And especially now, when I'm thinking about what's going on with in Ukraine right now, right, with this cyber warfare, between, I am going to put the word out there, I am going to say Russia, I am going to say China. I mean, this is very real. It's actually happening. It's happening as we speak, right? I mean, there's no way you can conduct war anywhere now without cyber being involved, anyways.
So you see, in the war today, the strategy, the strategic advantages which were presented or could be gained by having a geographical location or by having a specific type of resource. Those strategic advantages today they are provided only by, most of those strategic advantages they are actually provided by the cyber intelligence.
Right.
What you could do. So let's take an example. Between 2 countries who have gone about warring with each other, how could you gain a strategic advantage without actually placing anything on risk? Is that one of the simplest example of that is disrupting the supply chain, right? Today the supply chain disruption doesn't translate into actually physically going somewhere and trying to disrupt the supply chain. The supply chain disruption can be done completely virtually.
Yeah. I mean, think about money markets, right? Today, when we're talking about sanctions against Russia, Europe is saying, hey, I can just cut them out of the SWIFT.
Correct.
The moment I cut them out of the SWIFT, any transactions that go cross-border, sorry, you can't do it. If you're sending something to Russia or taking money out of Russia, you can't do it.
Correct.
It's literally, that capacity that I'm talking about that changes the whole context, right? Where earlier you needed to have thousands of troops and thousands and, hundreds and thousands of people on the floor actually doing this, fighting and stuff. And I know that's happening right now. Unfortunately, it's so tragic.
Correct.
That, we're sitting here in the 21st century, we're talking about, an experiential economy and, stuff like that. And we're still going back to the freaking Stone Ages, right? I mean, literally. I mean, this is how we resolve disputes in this in our world today. It's tragic and it's disappointing. I mean, it's
It is. It
really
is.
really disappointing,
It is. It is.
and then that brings me to actually another aspect which I wanted to talk to you about, Rajiv, is that we're seeing so many examples of toxicity in the workplace and in
Hmm.
leadership.
Hmm.
What's going on with people, right? I mean, is it just egos? Is it just people say whatever the hell comes out of comes out of their mouths? There's no filter between the brain and the mouth, and
I
people
mean,
just get away with all kinds of stuff.
correct. See, Aparna, I can understand this thing because of two reasons. Because I've seen two generations of it. I've seen similar level of toxicity back in around 2000. When
Okay.
the first .com bust happened. I was in US at that time, and if you looked at a lot of companies which are there in the Bay Area, quite a many companies in Massachusetts, you found that similar level of toxicity or similar approach to toxic approach to leadership was there. And then nowadays, if you see that's happening in India, and I guess one of the biggest problem is that you can compress everything. You can compress learning, you can compress operations, you can compress logistics into a shorter time frame. You can't compress experience into a shorter time frame. Right? If something takes, see, for me to understand something, you know,
Yeah.
can I compress? Yeah, I can compress that. But for me to internalize something, I can't. Mostly that can't be
Yeah.
compressed.
No, that's very
So
true.
today, I mean, if you look at, suddenly, I mean, some people who are dealing with the exponential growth, right? They have never seen, they've not gone about understanding, or they have not actually gone through the experience of that growth. Right? They're suddenly facing a growth. It's for them that growth is not an experience. For them, that growth is suddenly a monster they gotta deal with.
Right. Right.
And a lot of these guys, I mean, a lot of this. I mean, the leadership, we have been talking about the leadership in the and the growth mindset. The leadership in the context of a startup, uh, it needs to be redefined, right?
But the question I've got is that what the heck happens to these so-called boards, right? I mean, all these guys have got investors. They've got supposedly they're supposed to have a board and they're supposed to be judicious and blah 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 and all the rest of that. I see this even in corporations, Rajiv. I don't see this. This is not just this is not just a Bharat Pay or what is that other company? The guy who fired 700 people in the US. I mean, it's not just those things.
Hmm.
I see toxic leadership everywhere, and in some cases, what is ridiculous about this is
Hmm.
the glorification of such leadership.
Hmm. Correct, yeah, correct.
Actually, this guy is a hero. It's like,
Hmm.
oh man, look at him. Yesterday he was a techie, and today he's a executive vice president. It's like,
Correct.
excuse me. I mean, you may be the best of the people in terms of technical capability or brains or whatever, but if that emotional maturity, if the inability to relate at an emotional level and to be able to respect people, I mean, am I just being a dinosaur over here, or is this, or,
No,
you know?
it's very relevant. I mean, it's a very relevant question. It's a very relevant point. Is that so today? I mean, if you look at, I mean, certain level of toxicity is all across. But then, if you look at the outliers in the toxicity
Yeah.
or toxic behaviors, I find that a lot of those toxic behaviors are actually fueled and funded by the problems we have not been identified and recognized by the individual themselves. I mean, if you find
Mm.
it's extremely difficult for a lot of people to accept a mental issue or a mental health issue and
Right.
address that. So you combine that fact that I'm not talking about if a specific the kind of environment we live in, the kind of competitive spirit we are driven with.
Yeah.
And I'm talking about the whole of India,
Sure. Sure.
the kind of competitive spirit we are driven with. If you got a mental issue or if you got a mental health issue or you're not able to talk and resolve it, and on the other side, the entire ecosystem is stroking your ego because things are that way. If you're in a leadership position, obviously your egos are getting stoked up. You combine these two factors that your mental health issues, they have not been addressed. You have not been counseled properly, and then your ego is getting stoked by your ecosystem, and you're basically looking at an impending disaster. I mean, that's
Yeah,
what is happening.
absolutely, absolutely. And that brings me to the other point, right? I mean, having been in the work, working for as many years as you and I have, you know, mental wellness, and I want to bring this up. This is a very important topic, audience. I really want you to tune into this and listen to this because, mental wellness, just like physical wellness, is something that very few, in fact, nobody, as far as I know, in the workplace actually talks about.
Mhm.
I mean, you've got EHS, right? Employee Health and Safety, that comes in and says, your desk needs to be a particular height and your chair needs to be a particular way and blah, blah, blah. And you've even got occupational therapists who'll come in there and give you a freaking, physio and whatever if you've got a problem with, sitting and working at your computer too long. But there is not a single company that I know of that addresses mental health issues and mental wellness issues for their employees.
Correct. Correct.
Is it just the stigma that's preventing us from doing this? I mean,
It,
it means there's just a stigma there, right?
I think it's a stigma. I think it's a stigma on both sides. It's a stigma at individual level because a lot of people, they don't want to recognize that there is a mental health issue or I need to get counseling. So, and then even in the corporate setup, you would often see that somebody is actually getting accused of not being able to handle a stress, right? And what nobody talks about is that individual's response to a specific stressful situation could be affected by certain mental health elements.
Absolutely.
So nobody talks
Absolutely.
about that, right?
Yeah. And I can tell you from my personal experience, because, I have been battling bipolar for, not battling, I wouldn't say. I am a bipolar, person. And I'm struggling with this for, well, I would say easily 10 plus years now. And this is including in my workplace. And there was no help that I could get. Yeah. And, it would typically, company would outsource all of this stuff to some third party. Yeah, you got mental health issues. Here's an 800 number. Call these guys. They're supposed to talk to you. And it's like, dude, hello. So unless the employee or the person, the individual is willing to step up and help themselves, I don't think organizations are in any position to create that sort of an environment where
Correct.
people are, last week, for example, in fact, this week on Wednesday, I had my first show on coaching life, right? And I actually had one of the co-founders of Crater who was willing to be coached. And I could tell, very, very bright, very smart, very driven, very passionate sort of a person. And he certainly was struggling with the fact that, hey, I've got so many different priorities in my life. And yeah, sometimes this becomes like a pressure cooker. What do I need to do about this? It's good that we at least, this was a coaching session. So it was, something that we could explore. But imagine the hundreds and thousands of people out there who don't have that opportunity. Right?
Correct.
And so what in your organization, especially being a startup, right? I mean, it must be practically a 24/7 sort of a thing. I would think.
Correct.
So what are some of the things you tell your guys in order to be able to help them keep their mental balance?
The last 2 years have been trying. I mean, they have been very trying time for everybody. I mean, and particularly, I mean, in our organization, we got to a point where last year at a certain point in a certain month, more than 50% organization itself was affected by COVID. I mean, you can imagine, So now so generally, when we started looking at some people in the organization, and when we started looking at some people's behavior, then how they were coping or not coping with those situations. So at that time, instead of concluding something or instead of judging something, we basically set up a unit and we said, okay, we're going to talk to everybody. And it may not be practical, it may not be possible for us to actually do any physical in-person help, but we're going to talk to everybody, and we're going to talk to everybody multiple times a week.
Right.
And through it was amazing that we identified the challenges. People, they came up and they shared not only about how they are finding it extremely difficult to deal with the situation currently. Some people, they came back to us and say, that is a problem with my thinking, or that is a problem which I actually already had for the last couple of years, right? So,
Mm-hmm.
so this is one thing: opening dialogue and stop looking at the mental health related issue as a taboo. That's the first step, and that's something we, as an organization, we have done it very, very well. A lot of people.
Good.
We found, we are a small company, but we still found some 4 or 5 people who came back to us and they talked to us about that what challenges they're
Excellent.
facing, right? And then we
See,
facilitated whatever we
this,
could.
it's this openness, right? The willingness to at least be open about it without fear of being stigmatized or labeled or any of that stuff, right? I mean, it's very similar to the inclusiveness movement, right?
Correct,
I mean, the
correct,
whole point of whether it is sexual orientation or gender diversity or whatever, right?
correct.
I'm glad that these things are coming up, but similar to that, I want mental health also to be something, one of those topics that needs to come up. I think we're getting out of time here, Rajiv. This is what happens when you're having fun. We just, it's just before you know it, it's out there. So, audience, I'm going to pick up a few questions from what I've seen on the chat box, but please do pop in any other questions that we can get, that we can have some discussions around. So I'm going to start with one question, Rajiv, that came up from very early in our thing. Let me find it. Here we go. Yeah, this is from Shitij. Shitij, are you still there? I hope you are. I have a startup idea. Now I'm in class 11. So how can I start?
What the first and the foremost thing, if you are in class 11, the most important thing is for you to actually talk about your idea, because that is the biggest challenge you have when you are in that age bracket, when you are in that age group. The biggest challenge is that can you talk about your idea? The best thing you should do is talk about your idea to as many people as many you could, and then you're going to get to realize the validity of your idea. A lot of people, they would actually encourage you. They would encourage you about refining your idea. Some people, they might actually sort of go a step further. They might actually offer you mentorship. And if your idea gets to a point of maturity, you might be actually fortunate that somebody comes in and says that I want to fund your idea.
There you go. So, Kshitij, the point here, I mean, I completely agree with Rajiv, is the more people you talk to about your idea, I think it's fabulous that you're having this idea and you're thinking about it as a startup, right? I think that'll be fabulous, but talk to people, get multiple points of view. Don't just get one point of view, get multiple perspectives on this. And I know being in the 11th standard, I'm sure, probably your parents and other people are putting pressure on you. No, just right now, focus on your career, focus on your academics. You're coming to the 12th, finish it, get this, do your, admission and entrance exams for engineering, blah, 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 whatever. You have to, if you're passionate about something, Kshitij, I got to tell you, the only way to do it is to do all of it.
Mm.
If you truly believe in something, yes, you're going to have to bust your behind in terms of going out there and doing your academic work. Sure. You also need to be able to be willing to invest that time and effort also on your idea if you're really passionate about it and if you really believe in it. So I say go for it and go for both. Don't do one without doing the other. Do both. That's a great test for you for your own future in life, because as I'm sure Rajiv would be happy to tell you, as a startup guy and now in his 40 plus, to start a startup once you're 40 plus, it takes I can imagine what he's going through and what he has been through so far. So go for it, Kshitij. All right. Rahil, I hope you're still there, and I hope you realize that this was not just a cybersecurity related conversation. So that's good. Let me get down to another one here. Yeah, one of the questions here is from KV, I think. Yeah, how do you think it's going to impact the financial ecosystem in India and thus the business? I guess you're referring to the Ukraine war. I mean, the war in Ukraine. How do you think this is going to impact? Well, see, if that's the question, I'm going to jump in there. See, anything that happens anywhere in the world these days is going to affect the other parts of the world. I don't care how small, how big you are. It is going to, because we are all so completely interlinked and intertwined digitally and financially and economically, that it certainly is going to have an impact, right? And I don't mean a positive impact, I mean a negative impact. And the negative impact is very simple. Nobody likes conflict. We don't like conflict. Geopolitical conflict creates insecurities. And think about it this way, right? The single biggest gas pipeline that was supposed to be running through into Europe was coming through Ukraine, right? This is the Nord Stream 2 project. And that's been halted because Russia became the aggressor. Now, you can definitely imagine that fuel prices, right? Gasoline, petroleum prices, and petrol product prices are only going to go through the roof. The moment that goes up, then everything else starts to spiral. It's a very simple thing. I mean, so there's nothing that happens in the world today that is not going to affect us. And Rajeev, please feel free
Yeah,
to jump in.
I think, I mean, the one of the things which could potentially be Europe has got significant dependency on Russian energy reserves. I mean, so a lot of energy needs of Europe are supplemented by Russian sources, right? So that is why, I mean, there would be impact. There would be impact on oil prices for sure, right? And that would also the oil prices, when the oil prices are impacted, obviously almost every part of the economy every part of the economy is affected.
Yeah.
But we live in a world. What we need to realize is that it's an interconnected world, right? And anything happening across anywhere in the world, it will have some impact. And if it is a problem somewhere in the world, it will have a negative impact somewhere across the world, right? But then the benefit of the interconnected world is that you also have the equal amount of cushions across the world. Right? If it was not interconnected, then the cushions were not there. Some geographies would be more impacted and some geographies would be less impacted. So I see negative impact, but then I see that the global economy or the interconnected world has got certain cushions which will stop from this mothballing into a disaster.
Yeah, I don't want. You're right. I'm glad you added that in there, Rajiv, because this is not the end of. It's not like end of days. We're not talking about, at least not yet. We're not talking about a worldwide catastrophe just yet. Right now, does it have the potential to blow up into that? I guess any geopolitical situation that's as dicey as what we are in right now does have. But let's not think about that, because don't forget that there is the rest of the world that actually wants peace. That we don't want conflict. That's against the basic nature of basic human nature. So we don't want conflict. Forget about anything else. It's just bad business, right? I mean, conflict is bad business. So let's just end with that. I think we got it. Sriram, you've come up with a really good set of questions. I think we were talking about mental health and mental wellness. Rajeev. So Sriram asks, how do you talk to an employee who you think may need some help? It's difficult to kind of address it with them, as it can sound wrong.
It's difficult. It's difficult, and if you're having probably among all the conversations you could actually have with an employee, I'm gonna actually sort of say something here which is very close to my heart, is that we don't call anybody in Castellum as an employee. We call them members. The word employee is not used in Castellum.
Super.
We call them only members, and an employed thing is family members, right? So. And we use the word Castellum family. We internally, we don't just say Castellum Labs. We almost always refer as Castellum family. Right?
Nice.
So generally, I mean, in all the conversations you could actually have with a member, this is probably the most sensitive conversation you could actually have with a member of your organization. Right? So if you're trying having such a conversation without a context, it's always going to be offensive, and it's going to be the person who's the subject of that conversation would probably not open up, would probably become defensive, because this is still, at least in their mind, this is still a taboo subject. Right? This will still be seen as a disqualification of an individual or a problem with an individual. So the best thing is to basically find a context and build on that context, and have a conversation about the potential mental health issue in that context. Sorry, Bharat, you were saying something. Go ahead, yeah.
No, I wanted to just, very important here, Sriram. It's a great question you brought up. The one thing I want everybody here to know is, have relationships of trust. So unless you build that relationship of trust with your employees, with your team members, with your members, it's just like, the analogy is that, who would you like to talk to? Would you talk to somebody who is just a boss? Would you talk to a colleague who's just a colleague? You know, it just comes in there, we work together on a project, and then, hey, hi, bye, and that's about it. So it's very important to start to build a culture of a support network that employees and team members start to feel that, hey, you know what, I can talk to this person and I know that they will treat it with respect. And I know that they will, if not get me the help, but at least will be willing to guide me in order to be able to point me in the right direction, right? And then I can go there. So the key part to this, Sriram, in my opinion, and not in my opinion, I'm 100% sure of this, is the very, very important part is trust and respect. If in an organization you're able to build that atmosphere of trust and that atmosphere of respect, then any discussion is possible. I don't care how difficult it is, because everybody knows that this is being held within the very clearly laid out boundary of trust and respect. So thank you for bringing that question. So I would just say, yes, it is difficult to address it, but the way to address it is by building a relationship and by building that rapport and building that credibility based on trust and respect. Okay, we are out of time at this point, Rajeev. I wish we had more. And I'm sure our audience would be able to come up with much more than this. But thank you so much, Rajeev, for being on the show.
Thank you.
It's been an absolute pleasure and privilege to host you today.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me on the show. And among all the podcasts and talks I've done, this is one of the best.
I hope you had fun. More importantly, right?
I had a lot of fun. Thank you.
We did our job. That's good. Okay. Well, audience, thanks a lot, guys. All of you, guys and ladies, and everybody out there, thanks a lot for joining us. And this is also live streamed on LinkedIn Live. And stay tuned for recordings and updates. And next week, we have another episode of Saturday Night Fever. And again, we've got a very special guest. I'm not going to tell you who it is, but trust me, we will have. And, Rajeev, my benchmark is pretty high. So with you coming in there, I got to find somebody who's at least at this level or at least a little higher. So, and I'm going to work at it.
I'm sure you're gonna have a great lineup. You're gonna have like some real good people coming into this talk show.
All right.
I really wish well for this talk show.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate it, my friend. And talk to you soon, okay? And see you in Bangalore. I hope we catch up.
Right.
All right. Okay. Bye-bye. Bye, everybody.